Welcome to the Liberty Without Compromise podcast with Dan and Dawna Wilson. This is episode 2 in the series Power Player Pastors of Kootenai County. We're going in depth to uncover what's going on with the leadership in the largest and most influential churches in Coeur. Have pastors crossed the line when it comes to politics? Are they involved where they shouldn't be? Are they kingmakers? And who's advising them politically? Anyone looking for political power and control in Kootenai County knew that they must control, or at least have substantial control of the church. Has this already happened here? And I'm now introducing Dan, who's going to give us a recap of episode 1 and where we're going from here.
Yes, indeed. We are discussing what I faced as I was running for sheriff here in Kootenai County in 2024. Some of the largest churches in Kootenai County that happen to be in Coeur d'Alene, very involved politically. We figured out pretty quickly on at the very beginning that for some reason we weren't being supported by the churches. I wasn't being supported. And I say we because you and I ran this race together.
Right.
But it was odd to me at the very beginning to realize how much blowback and no cooperation, no welcoming, nothing for somebody who has followed Christ since I was 4 years old and have lived out my faith my entire life. I've been involved with many organizations over the years in Spokane before we moved over here to Kootenai County. And of course, a lot of our organizations cross the state lines, but I found it very, very odd that churches that claim that they are very political, active as far as patriotic American type of worldview, would not want to talk with a guy that was from this region.
And when you say not supported, it's not that you were seeking an endorsement.
Not at all.
But that what you found was they were actually stonewalling.
Yeah, stonewalling. And here I am. I'm a homeschool kid. I'm a first generation 1980 something homeschool kid from this region my entire life. Homeschooling dad myself, business owner, Christian, and I got nothing but the cold shoulder from several of these churches. And I think we're starting to uncover exactly why that is. In our last episode, we waited to disclose these conversations that took place that we knew about a long time ago, but we were advised not to bring it out prior to the election because our advisors just thought that it was going to be too difficult for people to hear things that was going to put them on overload. Lots of bad news overall. And, they just felt that if we were going to expose church leaders' bad behavior, that was going to send some people over the edge. So in the last episode, I disclosed some of our supporters from multiple angles and conversations that we legally obtained. We have them both in email format as well as audio. So what we read last week and what we will continue to read this week are transcripts from the audio that we have in our possession that was obtained legally. And we got some interesting feedback, folks that were upset that we would dare to do this and others that were extremely supportive. And I think that light needs to be shined on to things that are not right. And this gives us an opportunity to expose what these leaders are saying behind closed doors.
And I think that you had a lot of prompting by the Holy Spirit. There was a reason when certain conversations were recorded. There were reasons that led up to that. It wasn't just that you woke up one day and said that, or that it's your typical MO that in any kind of communication that you're doing this. But the fact that, like you said, churches were giving the cold shoulder, or some of these pastors, it didn't make sense. And so it required further questioning because it didn't make sense. And so I've sat here and I thought, if they just wanted to kind of like smooth things along, there would have been more cooperation or more welcoming, at least. It didn't mean, again, that they're throwing out an endorsement, but because that didn't happen, it drew more attention to itself.
In our last episode, we started out with a audio clip from a video that was released by the pastor during his Sunday sermon at this local large political church in Coeur d'Alene. And in it, he accused me of, he was astounded by the amount of lies that I was telling and that I had personally threatened him. And we debunked that. I further went into disclosing the original email I sent to this pastor requesting to meet with him to introduce myself back in January of 2024. And then the subsequent meetings from supporters of mine who were not sent by me to talk with this pastor, but specifically they were going on their own accord to say, why are you not aligning with this Dan Wilson? He believes and talks the way that you do when you're preaching to us and admonishing us to do good, godly things. And through the course of these conversations, it became apparent that, first of all, he claimed that I never contacted him. And then it was, well, he contacted me, but he was vague. And then it was, well, he didn't do enough to get my attention. And then it was, well, in his own words, he didn't wine and dine me enough because I'm a pretty big thing. We're going to talk about this a little more again. And this episode concluded with emails that he then sent to me 9 months later, where he was trying to put me in my place.
Right. And so you can go back and listen to the first of this series, Power Player Pastors, on this Liberty Without Compromise podcast. And that's going to give you more an hour-long detail of Dan giving that overview. So this then is a continuation.
Yeah, we want to dive back into the greater details. The last episode was specifically the response from the pastor that had called me out in that sermon. So we're going to continue talking about this same pastor and some other conversations. These are transcripts. So we're gonna jump into a little more detail. Now, this supporter of ours shared this with us, and they were very distraught over what they believed was unethical behavior by this pastor.
And they were there in the first place because, again, as somebody attending that is their pastor. And it was confusing. The road blocking that was happening was legitimately confusing to them. Again, drawing even more attention to itself and to the pastor.
And many of the parishioners that go to this church were supporters of mine. And this will become apparent as we go through these transcripts. So we're going to jump into this individual that went to meet with the pastor. And we're going to jump straight in. Person, there needs to be a forensic audit of the sheriff's office or of the county just to see where the money is going if the current sheriff isn't using those resources appropriately, or is somehow, if things are being hidden, if we're bringing illegals here or bringing them here at all. Pastor interrupts. We're not. I can tell you authoritatively. I can tell you this, and I can't tell you how I know it. We are not bringing illegals here illegally. If we were, we would not be doing so because I know the people that would be able to say, for example, our sheriff, no. And his hands are tied because these people are not proven to be illegals. In fact, I don't want to say more than I should because I don't want you to quote me on anything. But for example, I'll make an allegory. Let's say I made a phone call to a certain given official and said, hey man, go down to Walmart right now. There are about 25 Hispanic men in their 30s that are 5'2". All of them have checks in their hands and all of them are standing in line at the Walmart return counter to cash their checks. And let's say said official actually went down there and stopped those guys and said, hey, what's up you guys? How you doing? What's going on? Only to find out that every one of them had legal status. And shall we make this assumption, you and I, that this allegory actually happened? Are you reading me? Pastor goes on. And so our hands are tied. Moreover, let me give you another piece of information. The county commissioners that are presently in office are the ones that are responsible for the delegation of money. So the sheriff has to request money from the county, and the county commissioners, Bill Brooks, Leslie Duncan, and Bruce Matari, have to make the decisions about what they will and will not give him. And then he is allowed to use that money as appropriated by the county commissioners. And if they thought he was misappropriating funds, they're the ones who would have to do the forensic analysis.
Okay, I kind of see how we then got there, because it is confusing when you observe the pastor completely changing the subject to start in on a narrative that must have been something that he had planned to address in this conversation, because it just went from like nothing to whatever.
And he's claiming that he may
is.
have called somebody up and told him to go down and check some Hispanic males that are 5'2". Yeah,
just an allegory.
So I think that a couple things here that that I do want to interject is this shows you how little this pastor really knows and what he's being told. I made no bones about it that when I was running, one of my priorities was to ask the county commissioners, and this is key for this pastor. Maybe if you would have actually come and met with me, if you would have listened to any of my town halls, this would have been apparently clear, but you're probably too busy going to Hawaii and other places to have much time to pay attention.
Well, I would surmise that he wasn't allowed.
Uh-huh.
That actually would be what my take on it. He wasn't allowed to meet with you.
So the key, pastor, is I was going to ask the county commissioners for funds to conduct a forensic audit.
Right. Yeah.
And this guy doesn't even understand what that is. I mean, this is, again, something that he wants to talk authoritatively on, but really doesn't have the first idea of really what he's talking about. So anyway, that's just a little side note. Pastor interrupts again. So again, it's very complicated, and I think that's what's going to end up happening at some point here is that sooner or later, the proverbial poop is going to hit the fan somewhere. If there's activity that's going on that's actually illegal and unethical, it's going to come out because the Bible says whatever makes manifest is light, and so it's going to come out. Can I ask you a personal question that you can either answer me on or off the record? You tell me. Person agrees to the question. Pastor, are you advocating for Dan Wilson? Person, I am, and I'm hearing what you're saying, and I think there are a lot of other facts that I don't know that you're aware of. Based on what I'm hearing, and that's why I wanted to meet up with you about this more in depth, if you'd be willing. Pastor, I would, but my problem is that my next 2 weeks are booked, and then I'm going to be out of town for a week. I'm coming back for a couple of weeks, and I'm gone for another week, and it's very difficult to get to see me right now is the problem. Moreover, by the way, I've never heard anybody ever use the word moreover as much as this guy does. Moreover.
Well, we all have our repetitive phrases.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Moreover, I can tell you this much. What I really feel would be necessary would be for a public discussion, not a private discussion, but a public discussion where the sheriff and Dan communicate in public, like a mediated public debate. And the sad part of it is
what
that...
concept?
I know. And the sad part of it is that everybody who knows law is aware that Dan doesn't. And everybody who knows law is aware that the sheriff does. And the problem is that your sheriff, your present sheriff, probably has made some mistakes that, and again, I'm not speaking authoritatively, but he's got some mistakes and made some statements and done some things that have caused a great deal of suspicion about him, but provability is an issue. You know what I mean? I just want to interject here.
Yeah.
So everybody knows that I don't know the law.
Yeah, that's a pretty bold statement. And again, for somebody he's never met with, never spoken to, it's a very direct statement to say you don't know the law.
So apparently my 12 years in law enforcement, I don't know the laws.
Well, everybody knows.
And my
who's everybody?
Negotiating contracts with federal and state government and all my other 10 months of continually bringing to light all the bad things that Kootenai County Sheriff's Office was involved with in violation of certain laws. I don't know the law.
Yeah. Well, and he does say the issue is going to be provability. So really that is what he's getting at, is that you were spending time in your campaign drawing to light some of the things that Norris and his administration were doing that were questionable, at minimum questionable activity. So it's almost like he's Norris's mouthpiece here, where he goes on to say, well, if Dan says, well, Sheriff, you did this and such, and it's very quick and easy for the sheriff to say, well, prove it.
I'm going to go back. And the problem is that your sheriff, your present sheriff, probably has made some mistakes that, and again, I'm not speaking authoritatively, but he's made some mistakes and made some statements and done some things that have caused a great deal of suspicion. Put that away in your pocket. About him, but provability is an issue. You know what I mean? And for example, if Dan says, well, Sheriff, you did thus and so, it's very quick and easy for the sheriff to say, prove it. And likewise, for Dan to be able to make a statement like, we're going to get rid of all the illegals, then it would be very quick and easy for the sheriff to say, how are you going to do that? And Dan will not be able to tell you how because it's apparent based on his statements that he can't. It's sort of like when Trump said we're going to build a wall and Mexico is going to pay for it. You know what? I voted for Trump and I'm going to vote for him again, but I will tell you right now, he didn't do what he said. We paid for that wall. And so it's very complicated. I'm going to back up. That's another very bold statement from a man who apparently never came to any town hall, never listened to what I had to say, but listened to that idiot Bob Norris.
And he's going to go ahead in this conversation and make a false statement about something that you said. Yeah. That you, Dan Wilson, quote, says, we're going to get rid of all the illegals.
Bob Norris tried to do that very early on in the campaign.
Yeah.
And we caught him in his lie on video because I have never said one time that we can arrest any illegals because of their illegal status. So again, propaganda, or if he's going to speak authoritatively, like he keeps saying, he should probably truly know the facts before he's speaking authoritatively. So he goes on. It's very complicated. We paid for the wall. And the problem is, I'm going to be very personal now. Bob Norris I would not call him my close friend, but he is my friend. And I sat with him. I look him square in the eyes and I call him out. I talk with him man to man about things. And I've done so very recently. But I will tell you this. He has never let me down. Every single thing I have asked him to do for me, he has done. And so he has my support. And that's kind of the problem because I realize, is Bob a perfect guy? I don't know. You know what I mean? But I'm supporting him, And Dan, I'm going to sound very arrogant. Every politician, everybody running for office always calls me and asks me to make an appointment to see me. Dan has never done that. And I'm not asking him to. At this point, I'm probably not interested. But in our church, we have members that are supporting Dan, and we have members that are supporting Bob. And I just want to let the chips fall where they may at this point. I kind of don't want to get into it. I don't want to be divisive in our own church either, because the people in our church that are saying, hey, we're supporting and promoting Dan, I just tell them, that's awesome. Do what you feel is necessary. And they know where I stand, and we're not fighting about it, which is good. The person goes on to say, and I can say something about, I understand a lot of people contact you to discuss the runnings, and it's my understanding that Dan has reached out to you, and I believe that was over an email, but he hadn't heard back. Pastor. Yeah, he sent me one email that was about one sentence, and this was about, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 months ago. I can't remember. It's something like, if you'd like to talk to me, this is my number. And thanks, Dan. And that's not how you get to me. And again, that sounds very arrogant, and I'm sorry, but gosh, please forgive me for what I'm about to say. I carry pretty good weight in our community, and if people want to get to me, they got to get to me the right way. Person. I get that, and I don't know what the email says, but I understand what you're saying. Pastor. I don't fault Dan for that. He doesn't know me. He doesn't know our community, so I don't fault him for that. If he knew how much weight my voice carries in this community, I'm sure he probably would have offered to buy me dinner, not sending me an email that says, if you like to talk to me, here's my contact information, which literally was what he said. I'm summarizing it, and I might be misrepresenting it slightly. It was pretty close to that. Well, for those that may have forgotten or didn't join us for our last episode, here is the email that I actually sent the end of January.
It says, hello, I'm running for Kootenai County Sheriff as a Republican and would appreciate the opportunity to have a brief visit with the pastor to introduce myself. I've included our press kit as well as more info on my background. You will also find more details on my website at theidahosheriff.com. Thank you in advance for your time. Regards, and it is signed with your name and number, a typical email signature.
Doesn't sound close to what he just claimed that email was.
Yeah. And like we covered in the last episode, it was a generic sounding email address, and not being knowing the drill with this particular church. You don't know if this is going to secretary and then needs to be forwarded on to him. So that explains some of the lack of formality, or that it's not directed, has the pastor's name in it.
Person goes on to say regarding that email, it was a statement versus a question. Pastor, yeah, I think it was something. Maybe it was a question. Maybe it was a statement, but it was something in the neighborhood of a sentence or two that's something like, hey, Pastor, this is Dan Wilson. If you'd like to communicate with me about this upcoming race or something, here's my contact information. And that was it. And I just deleted it. No offense. He just deleted it. He didn't bother to respond to me.
Well, what that is indicative of to me is that there was a predetermined outcome. It has to be as though he thought, if I ever hear from this guy, I want nothing to do with it. What would be the other reason for that type of visceral response? If it was just an unexpected email and you have a natural curiosity, humans are born with a natural curiosity. Okay, there's a guy in the running. Yeah, I'd like to meet with him for a few to figure out what his backstory is and some of his ideas. That's a natural human curiosity, not to be immediately offended because the 3 or 4 sentences wasn't. Yeah, I don't buy it.
Yeah,
I don't buy it.
The person goes on to say, as far as what you're saying, like a public thing, a debate, I know that Dan has recently inquired about that and put out a public document to see if Norris would be able to do that or was willing to do that. And this is probably asking a lot, and I don't expect you to answer me on this, but if they needed a neutral space to meet, do you think that the church would be willing to host that? Pastor, yes, I think probably we would. Person again. And I don't know how it works with who is supposed to be the neutral party to present the questions for everything, but I know they need a neutral person to be able to do that, and I don't know who that would be. Pastor.
Now, this is where I want you to put your listening ears on too, because this gets into some pretty meaty stuff.
Yeah. Pastor goes on. Well, I'll tell you something more than. I did contact a person today that I thought would be a good neutral mediator, and he said, and I really, honestly, I thought he'd be completely neutral. And he said to me on the phone, he said, Pastor, I would have to decline, and I'll tell you why. Bob is a good sheriff, an imperfect man, but he's good sheriff, and I know Dan cannot win. And he said, for me, it would be a waste of time. And I think the sheriff kind of feels the same way. I'm not quoting the sheriff. I think that Bob sees Dan as more of an antagonist than a competitor. Dan's approach is Bob hashing. I mean, just go to the front page of Dan's website. It's all about the sheriff doesn't do this and the sheriff doesn't do that and he does this and he does that. He's a dirty, rotten guy. I'm summarizing instead of saying, quote, I'm Dan Wilson and here's what I can do and here's what I will do, unquote. He's just bashing Bob. And Bob bashing is not a way to inspire Bob to actually have an honest, open, and friendly debate.
So it's on you to inspire the sheriff to have a debate that the people deserve?
Yeah.
You have to inspire him to do that?
And who in the hell does
Give
this
me a
pastor
break.
think that he is to call anybody up? We never asked him to moderate or mediate anything.
Or to go contact somebody
Yeah.
that would moderate,
Yeah.
and then they're magically, again, framing
Right.
who you are
Right.
and that you're not worth anything and you're not going to win and you're just an agitator, and the sheriff agrees, and it's a waste of that potential moderator. It's a waste of his time.
Well, I can tell you, I can find people right now for this specific pastor that I could hand pick who would say that he's unfit to be a pastor of this congregation and also sorts of other things. But the point is that he was never asked to find a moderator. We never brought him into our campaign. He's a non-existent.
Why was he even making that phone? I mean, if this phone call in fact ever occurred, which I don't buy, nobody was asking him to do that.
He goes on and says, if somebody did that to me, somebody's going after me and they do it. People do this and they're just on the attack. I blow them off like a fly. I don't even give them the time of day. If they come to me and say, hey man, can I talk to you like you are? You're kind and open and thoughtful, and I appreciate this dialogue.
Is that how politics works?
Yeah, apparently so.
Do you enter a race against a sitting sheriff and then say, hey, man, let's sit down for coffee and talk through our opposing ideas? Or if you see that there's unethical behavior, are you, as a candidate and his opposition, allowed to question it and get people thinking?
Well,
and he needs to answer for that as the elected official.
Let's go back.
Yeah.
The original reason that I started making these public statements is because there is nobody holding our elected officials accountable in the state. Definitely not locally. Prosecuting attorney doesn't do it. The Board of County Commissioners don't do it. Nobody does it.
And we've learned there is no ethics commission.
And so literally the two things were this. Bob Norris makes close to $190,000 a year on disability retirement from Los Angeles. What were the restrictions on his work? And is he emotionally stable? Because we've shown many, many times over the several months that I was campaigning, Bob's emotional instability, his crying, his continual crying at public events, his blowing up at people. So I was asking that question, and then there was the other question about ethically why Bruce Matari, who is now county commissioner but was his then campaign manager, holds a special deputy status. And rather than Bob come out and show proof for any of these things to say, hey, Wilson, this is why you don't have to worry and I legally can do this, they didn't. They decided to come out and attack me and hold an event. But this comes back down to this pastor is helping to continue bully a candidate because
he's continuing that same narrative that
Yes.
that the Norris camp started in January, yet he's not politically involved and he doesn't want to be divisive and he wants us to just all get along.
Yeah.
So probably worth continuing reading this because again, these are transcripts legally obtained. And these are in this own pastor's words. There's no translation of anything. These are his words.
Yeah. Pastor goes on to say amen, and then the person, because you always have to say amen, the person, regarding finding a debate moderator, I have to figure out if there's someone in the area who is neutral, which is hard to find at this point. And again, that person is acting on their own behalf, not on our behalf. Pastor, it is, especially in this because it's somebody that is, we've already heard a lot of dirt at both ends. Interesting. We've seen some history. We've seen some strengths and we've seen some weaknesses, but for your benefit, the person I asked is not a resident of our county, but it was a person of authority that I thought would be neutral, and he was very non-neutral. He said, look, I've been watching this at a distance, and Bob is your guy. He knows what he's doing. He's an imperfect man, but he's a good sheriff. And so that was a surprise. I really didn't expect that.
This, again, is, and we're going to find this in a future episode, this is a reoccurring theme that the narrative that they're pushing out to the people is, let's go ahead and add in there that Bob's an imperfect guy. Let's make sure we emphasize that so that we're not going too far to say he's absolute perfection. But let's make sure that we're collectively admitting that Bob has faults, but he's a good guy, or in this case, he says he's your guy. We have now heard this from multiple voices. He's an imperfect guy. It's all streaming from the same. From the top down.
It's from DC Matari or his handler.
Yeah.
So I want to interject something too. At what point does what this pastor is doing by running interference and calling people up and saying, this is our guy, Wilson isn't qualified, all these things. At what point is that election interference by a 501c3 status pastor?
Yep.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
And of course, there's nobody with balls enough big in this area to take this subject on to say, look, it's time that maybe these churches get and audit themselves. Now, look, I'm a follower of Christ. Don't look at this as me turning on the body. What I am calling out is, and I'm not apologetic on this, I'm calling out bad behavior by those that are supposed to be shepherding their flocks. And we're seeing that they're doing other things other than shepherding their flocks. They're doing things that are borderline, I would consider to be possibly illegal. Again, don't know that for certain, but a man that's thinking things through says, why is a pastor who's, he's taken the 501c3 status, they don't want to pay taxes like the rest of the people, they get that protection. Well, shouldn't they play by the rules? Just a question.
Yep.
He goes on. would you consider, the person says, would you consider having an hour set aside for me? Pastor says, I would consider it. It would be a matter of when we can do it. I would also like, if possible, if I did make that available, I would like to have one person as a witness in the room with me that also has good legal understanding. I'm not a lawyer, and what I would like to have is legal representation from somebody that knows the law well enough to answer or ask the right questions. Person, okay, are you talking about someone to mediate or be able to filter out certain questions? Pastor, for example, you've come to talk to me about Dan and what he can do, and a legal authority would be able to say that is not legal or that is not possible. Whereas I wouldn't know all the laws. I have obviously good counsel, and I know enough people at our church who have a good understanding from a neutral perspective of the legal environment and the navigation of the legal environment. For example, Dan Wilson says that he would deputize citizens and have reserve officers or deputies. Every single deputy, reserve or sworn as lay deputies, would have to be insured, and the liability to the county of insuring a bunch of people. Let's just say if it was me, let's say he says, Pastor, I want you to be one of my sworn deputy volunteers. I'm going to have a deputy militia or army. The county would be liable for every action I made a deputy, and the county would never allow it because the liability is far too great. You follow that logic? So when Dan says stuff like, I'm going to have a whole army of backup soldiers, that's a wonderful idea. I like it. I think Bob would like it, but it's not even possible. Once again,
common theme, misrepresenting what your ideas are.
Yes.
And then pushing out to the public Dan's ideas. First of all, it's your idea in some sick and twisted version of your idea.
Right.
And then it's not even possible.
I never said backup soldiers at all. In fact, what he's doing is he's demeaning reserve deputies. I was a reserve officer for 12 years in full legal capacity. I was doing my job per state law. But apparently this pastor who keeps running his mouth over and over again about things he apparently doesn't understand. He needs somebody in there to tell him what's legal and what isn't. But then he goes on to run his mouth about things that he doesn't even know.
Well, and using words like militia, army, soldiers.
Yeah, so he's attempting to defame me. Now, I have said, because Idaho law allows recently retired law enforcement professionals from other areas, could be in the state of Idaho, it could be in the other 50 states, to legally be able to serve as reserve deputies. And so, again, he's diminishing, as if we're just going to take a bunch of guys like this out of shape pastor and make him a deputy and then say, here you go do deputy work. You're my army now.
Right.
It's a bunch of crap, and they know it.
As though you didn't have advisors, or you're not working with advisors, or you're not coming from an area of experience and with an understanding of the law. And you have been and will continue to be surrounded by people who have been in law enforcement for an entire career and do know the ins and outs of that. You sought counsel before you ever presented your ideas.
And we're going to talk about this in our next episode a little more, because these guys, these fanboys of Norse, these pastor fanboys, clearly massively underestimated exactly the research that I put into my campaign prior to running. And I will defy any of them to put in writing any of my ideas that were not possible and not legal. So he goes on and he says, he talks about the army and the backup soldiers. He says, and for a lot of reasons, the liability in particular, the insurance in particular, reserves or part-timers would have to be paid on payroll. It would cost the county in the neighborhood of thousands, millions maybe, to cover, just for example, we spend $20,000 a year to insure our staff, and that's just 22 people. So I'm gonna end this here. One last comment. He's completely messed up in many instances. He's talking authoritatively, but let me tell you something. Part of the problem in Kootenai County is we can't get enough candidates. It costs us way too much money to have the full-time deputies. And my solution is, no, we bring in volunteer, recently retired police officers, professionals, to come and put on the uniform and do the work as I did for 12 years for no charge to the community. And even if we have to pay insurance on them, and we're only talking about workers' comp, labor and industry type coverage for while they're on the job, we're not talking about retirement, we're not talking about healthcare, we're not talking about any of the typical government perks. It's going to cost, yes, some to put general liability, but that's far less than hiring brand new deputies to fill positions that Bob Norris has been basically incapable of filling for the past 4 years. And then lastly, this comment that you have to pay volunteers, what an idiotic, uninformed. You know where he got that from?
I do.
That's a verbatim of DC Special Deputy County Commissioner Bruce Matari.
Yeah. Am I the only one that finds it odd that you have County Commissioner Bruce Matari show up at your kickoff event on December 6th, 2023?
Right.
And combating your ideas that you presented then in word for word. Yep. And then fast forward to 7 months later, and you've got a local power player pastor commenting verbatim and contradict, saying this isn't possible. Imagine the liability. You've got to pay. Right. You've got to do these things. Word for word, what DC Matari was presenting back in December. And these people are working together to destroy anybody who dare challenge the person that they've installed. And I will take a step out to say that. It's not Dan saying it. It's me saying it. But the signs are there. And that's what we're really trying to draw to light.
Yeah, they really are. And I find it fascinating, once again, that this pastor, who apparently doesn't know much and doesn't want to know much, knows a lot about my policies, that he likes to skew them. Yeah. But he was too lazy, or as you said, didn't want to talk to me.
I don't think he was allowed.
So do you think his Homeland Security advisors?
I do.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this, why we believe in our next episode, why potentially we're looking at Homeland Security infiltration in our local elections and political offices. I'm not going to say that that's an absolute. It's a question that I'm asking, but I'm going to leave with this last statement that he makes. And I think that it needs to be said. He goes on, this person makes this question and statement. He says, "You're aware that Bob Norris has given special deputization to Commissioner Bruce Matari, correct?" Pastor says, "Yes, I am, and I don't like it." So that's probably all we're going to get through this episode right now, because the next one, there's a lot more to dive into, another conversation, much more to unwind as far as what these local, we're talking right now, one specific pastor, what his actions towards me have been from day one and continue to be, even after the election.
Yep. Thank you for listening to this episode number 2 of the Liberty Without Compromise podcast with Dan and Dawna Wilson. This is Power Player Pastor series, so make sure you stay tuned for the next episode. You can listen and subscribe at libertywithoutcompromise.com or wherever you get your shows. See you soon.